Hey everyone, welcome to the 414th episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patron Bill Mann, good buddy of ours. You can check out some of his work at the ppsgroup.co. He's actually someone we've spoken about on the podcast before, so thanks, Bill, for joining the Patreon. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt Enlow. Today we've got Avril Speaks on the show. She's got a new podcast called Distribution Advocates Presents. Avril is part of a squad of like-minded filmmakers who banded together to advocate on behalf of filmmakers and educate on the nature of distributing your film and also rethinking or thinking through alternative ways of distributing your films in the doc space, but feature space as well, all over the place. It's a really great conversation, and we kind of dive into the top line nuggets of the episodes that they cover. So all of the different topics that they hit upon, like they talk about sales agents, they talk about awards, film festivals, film school, exhibition, and of course, distribution. So we kind of touch upon each of those topics. If you're curious, if you want to check out more about what they have to say, you can go to distributionadvocates.substack.com and dig into all of the resources that they've created for filmmakers. It's a pretty cool conversation.
Yeah. Did you know that Avril is a recipient of the inaugural Dear Producer Award?
No, that's great.
Yeah. Dear Producer is the site and kind of movement. I don't know, Rebecca Green, a former guest, also a producer. She produced It Follows and a bunch of other cool things. And Avril is also, aside from being an expert and kind of educator on distribution, she's also a producer and a director and a showrunner. She has a show with Netflix. She's, had films at South by and worked with Sundance and done all sorts of cool things. But, in our conversation, she tells us that Sundance isn't the be all end all of filmmaking. So hopefully that is either good news or bad news.
Yeah. I think it's really a conversation about reframing what is right for your film and that it's not a one size fits all solution. And I think for a long time, we, for better or worse, hoped that it was, right. And countless filmmakers, practically every person we know has had this mentality of well, I should at least apply, I think that there's an undercurrent of because that is the best thing for any film, which is not necessarily true. And this isn't an anti-Sundance or anti-film festival conversation by any means, but it's more about opening up your eyes to alternatives and also really trying to drill down and question what is the right path for your film and how can you build a strategy around it.
Totally. Yeah, it's a fun convo and I'm excited for y'all to listen to it.
You and I went to
the
Kodak
forgot about that.
The Kodak Awards about a week ago now.
Yeah, I don't think I talked to you since then.
The funny thing about hosting a podcast is you end up on press lists. And so we ran into a handful of previous guests. It was at the ASC Clubhouse, which is pretty cool. It's across the street from the Magic Castle. I bring it up because it's award season. Mentioned later in this conversation, my wife was at the PGA event.
I went to the commercial nominees awards or meet the nominees.
What's cool about it, this is not just bragging about some fun parties people get to go to, but does it reinvigorate you? Does it kind of inspire you in any way?
Yeah. I mean, I'm into the bragging about the fun parties, especially for us since we don't go to a lot of fun parties.
Sure.
And I think to me, the funniest part of the night is that both of us had the same reaction. We showed up and they have a check-in for guests and a check-in for press. And you got there earlier than me, classic Enlow. And you're oh, we check in at the press, area.
Only in relation to you, Oren, am I the early one.
Yeah, no, that's I meant classic in terms of our relationship,
Sure,
not in terms
sure.
of who you are as a
Yeah, though
human.
I did get there early and was kicking myself because
Yeah.
it's
No, your reaction from getting there early made it clear to me that you're not used to getting places early.
yeah,
Because you were like, there's only 35 people here. What
yeah,
am I
it's
going to do?
just like, oh gosh. Well, and it's been a minute since I was at one of those events, and I used to go to stuff like that all the time, and as a result, you're going to run into people that you know. You know what I mean? But like I said, it's been a minute since I've gone out and all of that, and of course, we ended up running into a handful of people. But like that thing of like, oh dang, am I gonna just be standing in the corner, like making eye contact with each waiter who knows that I'm just gonna like silently eat something every single time they swing by? And is that gonna be my whole night until Oren gets here? Oh dang. He's not gonna be here for 2 hours.
Think about it from their point of view. If you're catering at an event, like an award event at the ASC Clubhouse, it's not like a huge event. There's probably like 100 people there, you know? So
Yeah,
most
more than
people
that. More than that
there
for sure. But yeah.
had some, you know, influence. You're really good at, like, would never know what Christine Vachon looks like in a million years. You're pretty good at pointing out some people, but we saw, Matthew J. Lloyd, who was on the podcast, and
Louisa Vick was also on the podcast.
yeah, his agent, and Ava DuVernay, who he worked with, was there. And so
she was so fun, man.
I think if you're as a server, yeah, we did not talk to Ava, but we should have.
I will say, you know how every once in a while you see a filmmaker, you're like, oh, they've got it. No wonder. A genius across the board. Like, just like so good at working the room. I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, she kind of like radiates like charisma and confidence. But even Celine Song, who kind of like underplays it, I thought, like, when she went up to speak, is like such a good speaker, like she knows interesting things to say.
Well, also, it reminds me of film festivals. If you're playing a handful of festivals and you're doing a bunch of panels, you can tell like the early panel versus the late panel anecdotes. Do you know what I mean? Like, people get their shtick kind of dialed in a couple panels in, and so at a certain point, you try to be interviewer proof. Like if you just kind of have a couple good jokes or a couple ways into different stories that are gonna land. I imagine that there's a version of that on these people who were doing pretty heavy duty PR tours. You know what I mean?
But what was so kind of weird about this event, it was the Kodak Film Awards. So the only eligible people to win these awards are people who made their movies on literal film, like celluloid. On celluloid. Yeah. So every speech was like, we decided to shoot on film, and it made all the difference. So they haven't given that speech a lot,
What's funny is that I didn't even put it together until a couple awards in. I was like, oh, we're only going to talk about celluloid tonight.
Yeah. No, it is weird. But but back to like when we got there and we got in, we had to check in as press, and they gave us these lanyards. Both you and I are like, what the hell? We are not putting these lanyards on. We are filmmakers. We're here as filmmakers. And yeah, we happen to have a podcast, and we happen to know some of these people, but like, the people that we ran into, like some of them, we know from outside of the podcast also. And I don't know, there's just this weird, like, I've never thought of like press at an event as like second class until I was press.
Well, it kind of depends also though on I think that says a lot more about us than it does about press, because I think there are plenty of people who grew up dreaming of being great reporters,
like a reporter, yeah,
like lots of status,
right? If you're like Roger Ebert and you walk in there and everyone's like,
sure,
it's Roger. Who's he gonna talk
to? Matt Bellamy from The Town or whatever. Hey, I'd be very excited to meet him, and also like he doesn't have a chip on his shoulder. He's like, hey, I'm going to report on this tomorrow, and
But to us, I guess instantly when they're like, you're press, it made me feel like, oh, I'm here for work, and everyone else here is for the party.
Everyone was there for work, Oren.
Yeah, but you know what it is. Like, I'd rather be there to schmooze than to like report. But then, of course, while we were doing the awards, we were standing in the back of the room, so we had a pretty bad view. And I'm like, hey, we are here for press. And I like walked right to the front. I started like photographing everyone and putting it on our Instagram because I was like, I mean, this is why they invited us. I guess we might as well walk to the front and like
I think
take
honestly,
a picture of Van Hoyte.
Hoyte van Hoyte. Cool dude. I wish we'd talked to him. That would have been nice. He was around.
He seemed very easy to talk to.
Yeah. And like you're just surrounded by world-class DPs for sure.
Yeah. Everyone there is someone, something.
Yeah.
And at the end of the night, we ran into some actors that were like, come drink with us at the Roosevelt. And I was like, yeah, party time.
Mm-hmm.
And you went home and I went and partied for at least another hour.
I think that both of us are pretty happy with our decisions. To be fair, you also had history and you were old friends.
I knew the person that invited us.
I had just like met they were all very nice, but I was like, I'm going to go see my wife.
I guess I'm in this, I have 2 kids and a wife, and I have just this social life that does not revolve around like going to parties and like randomly going to bars afterwards. And it just seemed like, ooh, this is something that has not happened every night for me. Sorry, I bet most of our listeners are like, Oren, you just literally, that's like what going out is. It's like you go and you meet people and you go somewhere else. But to me, that was quite rare. So it was exciting to go meet a bunch of new actors and, head honchos and producers and people and drink. And, I'm sure you'll be very disappointed to hear that at the end of my drinking and snacking at the Roosevelt, I asked who I could pay. And they're like, it's taken care of. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's nice.
It's extra nice when someone has paid for all of your entertainment.
It is funny. There is a vibe to a certain type of actor. And this was like a whole squad of people where you're like, yes, I can tell that you're all like kind of famous, but I can't put my finger on how I know you. And that's going to just be hanging in the air until we figure it out eventually. Do you know what I mean?
I go home and
you
every
IMDb
single
somebody.
one of you on IMDb. Yeah. There was this one actress there named Tiffany, and I was like, I've seen you in so many things, but I don't know her last name, so I just typed in Tiffany into IMDb and inconclusive result. So I'll never know. I might have been hanging out with,
Amber Thiessen.
Yes. Was it her? No, it wasn't her.
No.
I would know Tiffany.
Yeah, you would know.
Anyhow, clearly one of us cares more about this than the other.
Well, let me ask you, were you like, should I shoot on film?
Oh, well, I was going to say absolutely not, but to me, I would shoot on film.
I drank a little of the Kool-Aid. I was like, maybe. Yeah,
if I had a lot of money. Like I like to do a lot of takes and keep the camera running because every time you say cut, it just stops you. So if I had a shoot where it was like, I was the final say on like whether a take was good or not, then yeah, I would mess with film.
I think there's that. It would certainly change our habits, right? Like I instinctually will say still rolling, because I don't want people to jump in and adjust a lav mic or fix somebody's hair or like flip a collar down or whatever. I want like we're in the scene, nobody do nothing, we're still rolling, and we'll talk for 5 minutes. And like that's annoying to an editor, and I guess we spend money in hard drives or whatever, but you have to cut when you're rolling film.
Yeah.
But I think there is that thing of like,
I mean, it looks really good.
It looks really
and it is like a precious, like everyone was like, the actors see the film camera and they're, ooh, this is a serious movie instantly.
Yeah.
But,
and take takes seriously, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't know that I have a rolling rehearsal.
Right. No, for sure.
Film,
But, Celine Song, who did Past Lives, was talking about shooting in South Korea. And she said that they just literally, there's no film shooting there. So they couldn't even process the film. They had to mail the film back to New York, and you can't see the footage you shot for like 3 or 4 days.
Ava DuVernay and Matthew Lloyd told an anecdote about how when they were shooting in India, they would send somebody on a train to Mumbai to develop the film because they had to send them by train to avoid X-rays from airplanes. Like airplane security would ruin your negatives.
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking.
That is. I'm nervous, and everything worked out okay for them.
Yeah.
I'm nervous on their behalf.
Who knows? I mean, when you shoot that much film, maybe you lose a role and it's okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyhow, if you want to support our budding journalism career, you should check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/justshootitpod. It's where you can go to give us $1, $2, $4. If you do join our Patreon at any number, we will mention you, and I will quickly try to assess what your website is or how to promote you right before we record an episode. So if you already are a patron and you want us to mention your website, your Instagram, your whatever, show your portfolio or Vimeo, email us justshootitpod@gmail.com. If you're not, sign up for our Patreon, patreon.com/justshootitpod. Super helpful. It's what helps this podcast keep going. It's what gets us into press events.
Also, we've got a live show coming up March 20th, the Lee Strasberg Theater. But if you go to patreon.com/justshootitpod, you'll be in the know.
Okay. Anyhow, speaking of speaking, here's our spoken chat with Avril Speaks. Hey, Avril Speaks. How's it going?
Good. It's going great.
Awesome. Thanks for coming to our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You have your own podcast, Distribution Advocates Presents. So Presents is part of the name though, right?
It's part of the names. So it's actually a group of us. We're a collective called Distribution Advocates. Mm-hmm. And so the podcast is called Distribution Advocates Presents. We're so creative.
Yeah.
And so what, tell us about the group. Who are you? What's your mission? Who are you? I mean, and
so Distribution Advocates is essentially a collective of producers who got together during the pandemic while, when everything shut down and no films were being shot and everybody was kind of sitting around going, what's going to happen to the industry? Are we going to be able to make movies again? I don't know. And there were just a lot of questions about what's happening and how do we still do this thing? And a bunch of us got on a call and somehow the conversation turned to distribution. Mm-hmm. And every single one of us had some kind of gripe or horror story or, complaint about the state of distribution. And, if you remember during that time, there were people, some people were having conversations about maybe this is our opportunity to do things differently and make change in the industry. And so we started having conversations like that about distribution. Are there different ways that we can think about it? And also, how is it that, a lot of people don't really know what happens when you distribute a film and kind of what that process is about. And so we started having conversations about the distribution process, what it could look like to change.
And just to butt in for a second, when you say distribution, are you talking about feature films or what?
Yeah, I would say primarily feature films is kind of, I think that the majority of us are feature film producers, but a lot of the issues that we were finding kind of just go across the board. It's shorts, it's features, it's docs. Our work tends to focus more so on documentary films, but a lot of the stuff that we talk about and a lot of the things that we discovered during the process apply to all different types of films. The first thing that we tried to do was, we figured we'd start with education. And so we just started going around to different organizations and kind of doing what we call teach-ins. So we created a cheat sheet, which if you go to our Substack, you can see our cheat sheet is on there. And it's just kind of like points. I think there's maybe 13 points on there on what filmmakers should consider when they're putting a film into distribution.
And that's distributionadvocates.substack.com in case you're not driving right now.
Right. Exactly. And so we started doing those teach-ins, and it just became really clear to us just how little people knew, and people were contacting us, and they were just saying, like, this information is so, needed, and thank you for publishing this information. And we started getting more requests to keep doing these teach-ins, and it got to be like, okay, this is a lot. Like, we're having to keep, repeat this information over and over again. So we figured, let's do a podcast so that we can put the information on there, but then also the hope being that we can continue to have these conversations and hopefully, further that conversation, the dialogue about how we might be able to envision different systems for how we distribute our movies and get them out into the world and into to audiences.
So that's so funny because I feel like Oren and I started this podcast in a similar sort of vein of just like, oh, when you're a young filmmaker, like people are just like, hey, can I pick your brain? Can we go to coffee? And you kind of feel like you would say the same things over and over again. And we were like, what if we said the same things over and over again on a podcast instead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
And every time someone asks us for some advice, we're like, just listen to this episode or this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, so you have kind of some awesome categories of things that you cover on the show. You talk about sales agents, awards, film festivals, film school, exhibition, and of course, distribution, and presenting, I assume, and advocating. So what's, if you don't mind, we're going to ask you just a little bit about each thing, like sales agents. What is that a thing? Like, I feel like sales agents are one of the kind of old school, at least when I first moved to LA and got into like Hollywood filmmaking in 2005, like almost 20 years ago, the sales agents were a thing. I haven't really been in the feature space for quite a few years, so I don't know if there's still a thing, but what's the current status, post-COVID sales status on sales agents?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I will say one of the things about the podcast that we tried to do in terms of our format is we tried to root everything in storytelling. So we wanted to find filmmakers who had been through, that topic and who had an interesting story to share. And the sales agent episode, we featured a filmmaker named Seth Hernandez, who did a film called Unseen. It's a documentary film. Did I say seen or unseen? It's called Unseen. It was really interesting hearing that filmmaker's story because you ask kind of what is the current state of sales agents. It's like, if you listen to Seth's story, I think, you talk about, young filmmakers who are getting into it for the first time and have these expectations. And I think in the case of Seth, he came into this situation just saying like, I've made this film and, people are out there that are going to help me move this film forward. They're going to help me find distribution. And, for a film called Unseen, ended up feeling very unseen by sales agents. And, that was sort of, one of the big takeaways from that episode is just kind of that relationship of sales agents. And then also just kind of ending with that question of, what would happen if we didn't need sales agents? Do we really need sales agents?
Right.
And I think kind of just breaking down that perception that, they're the roadblock to getting distribution, because the reality is like, you really can reach out to distributors on your own, or you can set up your own, systems of distribution. The value of sales agents is that, they, have those kind of direct relationships with distributors, but it's all a matter of really taking into account, like, where are you trying to put your film in the first place? And then does that make sense? Does that make the most sense to have that type of partnership? And like I said, in the case of Seth, their experience was just one where it wasn't one that felt very fruitful, or it didn't feel like their film was being cared for, if you will. And as filmmakers, we spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources in making the content that we do. And when you get to that point where you have a finished product,
hope that someone's there to take the baton, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I am curious about. It's funny because we've talked about sales. We've had sales agents on the show, and they've been generally pretty great and informative, and they seem like decent people, which was not really my experience with my sales agent on my feature back in the day. But now that I think about it, if you do have a producer, that's produced multiple indie films and sold multiple indie films, do you need, what is a sales agent? Do you even need a sales agent? Because we had a sales agent because we had never sold a movie before. And Matt, you had a sales agent on See You Next Christmas. But if you had a producer, who knew, like an Avril or like a Rebecca Green or like someone who's sold indie films in the past, they just call, right? Like you have a show with Netflix, right? Couldn't you just call them and say, hey, I got this movie. Do you want to check it out? What's the sales agent for?
Yeah. And it's yes. Netflix in and of itself has 1,000 different divisions. Sure. So it's doing a show with Netflix, doesn't always translate to, that right department, that department of an indie film and who's doing acquisitions for those indie films. On the same token, yes, if a producer, or even directors in some regards, if they, if you have that relationship and the acquisitions person, there's nothing stopping you from making that connection on your own.
Sure.
Like I said, the value of sales agents is, they're the people that have that direct access. But if you have that direct access and you or someone on your team has that direct access on their own, then it's a question is it imperative? And also, is it something that, does that give you a better chance of your film getting distribution or not? It might, sure. And it also might not,
Yeah. It brings to mind a really, really complicated aspect of the relationship between independent filmmaker and sales agent. I love your thoughts on, because there's two versions of the relationship that I feel like we've seen over the years. One where that sales agent is careless and gatekeeps, right? Like that isn't really delivering on the promises that they make. But then the flip side is sometimes those sales agents just have a more objective perspective on where your film fits in the marketplace, right? And as filmmakers and as dreamers and as artists, we're always like
theatrical release.
Yeah, or just that this is a diamond in the rough. I know exactly why this movie is special, and I know that there's an audience out there, and maybe people believe that it's a broader audience than it is in actuality or whatever, but that's always the case with a feature film. Studios think that their movies have, big broad appeal, and there's flops all the time, right? So there's that balance, right, between oh no, this is the company that's right for you, even though it's smaller than what you were hoping for, and therefore the money is going to be much smaller than what you were hoping for, versus, like I said, gatekeeping, just underestimating or just kind of trying to oversell on a library of movies where they're just kind of callously hoovering them up to maybe sell to a streamer at a big old deal or big old sale. How does that strike you?
I mean, I always tell filmmakers, only what your film, in terms of what your goals are for the film. And I always tell filmmakers, especially if they are going to go that direction of a sales agent, to really take in mind, it's exactly what you're saying. Does that sales agent and what their goals are, do those align with your goals? Because I've been in scenarios where I've had films and, we try to get a sales agent, and then we've had two choices where we had like a big agency and then we had a tiny agency that was very honest about, look, this is what your film is, but here's how we can, strategize to create the best type of, kind of rollout plan or the best distribution plan for the type of film that you have, versus, a larger film where your film is another number. They're, and it's like you're saying, like they're gatekeepers, and they're kind of like, okay, you belong in this library over here, and your film goes on a shelf, and you get paid your money, if anything, and your film goes on a shelf. Most filmmakers want your film to have especially with indie filmmakers, we want your film to have some type of life. You want to have dialogue, and you want to have impact, and you want to have these types of things. Like I said, I've been in situations where we wanted those, we wanted to have the dialogue, we wanted to have impact in the community, and that smaller sales agent was more on that wavelength of being a little bit more tailored, and to say, maybe it's, maybe we play non-theatrical in this market, and maybe we sell to, we sell educational, and maybe we sell to this, so he's kind of like piecemealing it so that you have a more tailored plan and a more tailored approach. So I always just, one of the things when we started doing the teach-ins at Distribution Advocates, I think the first thing on that cheat sheet actually is, figuring out what are your goals as a filmmaker. I say this all the time. It's probably like anybody who's ever heard me speak or, on a panel or in a workshop or anything, I always tell this story about when I, produced my first film. Someone said to me, you can have money. She said, money, eyeballs, or impact. Pick one. And of course, as filmmakers, I'm like, I want all the things. Like, no, I don't want to pick just one. But
like Oppenheimer did it all.
Right, exactly. But it does, when you pick one, it does start to kind of make you sort of think, okay, what's the strategy for that? Like if it's money, then like, what's the strategy? If I need to make my investors money back, and that's fine. That's fine as a goal. But what is the strategy for that? What's the strategy for impact? What's the strategy for eyeballs? And hopefully in a great scenario, you pick one and you get all of them. But that's because you have a tailored approach, and you have, so I think sales agents kind of falls into that as well. It's like, choosing the ones that are going to align with whatever it is that you decide in terms of goals.
Right. My last question about sales agents before we move on is just the money. Like, we've talked to distributors and sales agents and stuff on the podcast before. What's from your experience of like working with big agencies and also small, like single person sales agents? Are you supposed to pay them money up front, or do they work on a commission? Or is it like, what if you have a tiny $150,000 film that might or might not be sellable? Like, why would the sales agent even take it on if there isn't any sort of guarantee for them?
Yeah.
How does the money work in that?
Well, first of all, you shouldn't have to pay a sales agent up front. If somebody's asking for money up front, you be wary of sales agents that are asking for that. Typically, a sales agent will take a percentage of your sale. So when your film sells, then they'll take a percentage of that minimum guarantee, which is kind of that. It's kind of like a loan against what your film is going to make in the long run. So, when Sundance comes around, you always hear these stories about like this film, sold for, such and such millions of dollars, or, six figures or whatever. That's your minimum guarantee that comes to the filmmaker, and your sales agent will take a percentage of that. And so that percentage can be anywhere. For a domestic sales agent, it can be anywhere. It could be, 10, 15%, 20%. It's a bit higher for international sales agents. just because they have to sell to every territory, and it takes a little bit longer. So sometimes, international sales agents, it can be up to 35%, of that minimum guarantee or of those fees that they get. So it is something to keep in mind. It's like that's another one of those things of, working with a sales agent. They're also taking fees out of whatever, out of your minimum guarantee or whatever monies you make. In addition to the distributor, they're also taking out their percent. They're also going against that minimum guarantee, which, I don't want to go into that whole thing, but, it's like they're taking out their cut as well. So a lot of money is being kind of taken out, which is, another thing to take into consideration in terms of what's right for you and how much you're looking to keep and how much of your rights you're interested in keeping on your film.
And I imagine that that's really what we're talking about in terms of trade-offs, right? Like, okay, an international sales agent, if they're taking 35% of your MG, of your gross profits, right? Like that's before, net. And if you, boy, heaven forbid, like you don't have like all of your music rights or all festival rights or something, things like that. Movies always have other expenditures after they've sold. So if you get a certain MG, someone's taking 35% off the top, and then you've got to pay X number of dollars for a song that you need to license or whatever, and then a DCP and the encoding fees and blah blah blah. You could end up with like very little to slice. That's a small pie to slice up, right?
Exactly.
Compared to keeping that 35%, basically, and calling up all of the different territories yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean that's it. That seems like untenable unless you're going to like the film markets on your own. I mean, it just seems like impossible.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
And I mean, and that's like you said, that's the trade-off. That's a lot of work. Like when you think about all the territories that exist in the international space, it's like, that's a lot.
Even just selling like airlines and hotels and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
A whole company's worth of people's jobs. Yeah.
Well, so obviously that's kind of the business side of like getting your movie sold, but there is also the like accolade side. So, I think that the other two things that you cover on your podcast are awards and film festivals. Can you tell us a little bit about like how much that matters and how much that affects, whether your movie is even sellable? I think kind of the common knowledge that we have on this podcast is, if you get into like one of these top 5 to 10 film festivals, it makes all the difference. And then if you don't, then it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah. I think one of the things we try to do at Distribution Advocates is kind of dispel some of the myths that we have in filmmaking. I think, when we had our initial, meetup, we all had stories about filmmakers who would come and we'd say, come to us as producers and we'd say, okay, what's your plan? And they say, we can make the film and then we'll get into Sundance and then it'll get bought by A24. And that's the plan. And
it's a pretty good plan. I mean,
it's a pretty good plan. What's wrong with it is that most films that, we did a study in 2022 of the films that played.
I don't know if I want to hear this part.
1 out of 7 million films gets into Sundance.
My soul's about to leave my body.
20,000 Sundance films makes money.
Yeah.
I mean, in all fairness, like I said, a lot of our work is with docs, but we did do a survey, surveying the films that played at Sundance and how many of those films sold coming out of Sundance. And more than 80% of the docs that came out of Sundance did not sell that year. And so, what happens to that was in 2022 when we did that survey. And it wasn't that much better for 2023 either. 2024, I mean, it's still TBD. I think, because when we did our study, we had to lengthen it for several months, because obviously not every film sells immediately after Sundance. Some of them takes, a few months down the line to go. So we're still in the,
Sure.
we're still in the
Right.
beginning. Sundance just happened last year, but we did see, some sales that came out. I know Netflix, purchased, a couple of docs out of Sundance. So we did see some sales, but in terms of the overall, in terms of percentages, we just don't know that yet. But, historically, I shouldn't say historically, but I'll say in the past couple of years, we've seen this decline of films getting bought out of Sundance. And so that's the reality. And so does that mean don't apply to Sundance? No, it just means and also does that mean don't let that be part of your strategy? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that, but we are trying to, encourage filmmakers to think beyond that, and also, to just kind of diversify the possibilities of what that could be. So, you have that on the film festival, and then, but also as it stands right now, those festivals, whether it's Sundance, TIFF, I mean, you could go down the list of, sort of those top tier festivals, right now. And I think a lot of it is just mindset, that is sort of the mindset, and the idea is that if you play at these festivals, then your film is really good, and that your film is going to be successful. And, for a lot of filmmakers, that's still kind of the
Sure.
The golden ticket is to be in that. And so we're just
but
to
if you don't get into Sundance, then what percentage of films, sell? Like, it seems like you're saying, even if you get into Sundance, it's still like 20% chance you sell your movie. But what else is there? Like, if you don't get into a top tier festival, is there anything left to do?
Absolutely. I mean, there are other avenues. There are, one of the things that we're trying to, and I think we talk about this a little bit in our exhibition episode. We have a distribution episode that's coming out, well, I don't know, by the time this airs, it might already have dropped. But, we're also looking at there are other spaces to distribute. And again, like, this is part of the conversations that we were starting to have during the pandemic is, first of all, I think people to put that aside for a second and go back to festivals, I really think as filmmakers, we shouldn't underestimate the value of regional festivals and how much that can do for a film. There are tons of regional festivals. There are tons of niche festivals that can elevate your film. At the end of the day, it's about your audience. And I mean, even for distributors, I think that, if you can prove that you have an audience, that's the key, right? I had one of the films that I produced. We played one festival, which was it wasn't any of the top tier festivals at all. It was a Pan-African film festival where we played, and we had a good, showing and a good turnout. We got some good reviews from it. We got, some good write-ups from it. And as a result, we were able to get the film distributed on Netflix. It was a license deal. We got it for a couple of years, which was great for us because we were able to retain our rights. And so we put it on there for 3 years, and now we get to, take it wherever we want it to go. And so it's really more so just about strategy and kind of how you can utilize the buzz from other festivals and use that as leverage. I have another film I'm producing, a documentary that I just produced is kind of making its round in regional festivals. And it's so funny. We just played at a festival last weekend, and the director of that film, she directed another project, and that same weekend that we played the film at that local film festival, she had 6 sold out screenings for her other film, and was traveling all around Virginia, like doing these screenings, and was getting paid for every one of them. So it's like, it's thinking outside of the box. And that's one thing, and it's not a thing that, like, as distribution advocates, we haven't figured out, I can't give you a formula for that, but that's the conversation that we're trying to have, is that as filmmakers, let's try to think of how can we think about this in a different way. And, let's not put all of the onus on Sundance and South by and, and these festivals to make or break people's careers and to make this sustainable. There are other ways to do it. You can also carve out, you can use sort of that prestige that you get from regional festivals. You can carve out your rights. You can, like I said, sell it to an educator, to an educational company. You can, there's options, you know.
You know what I love the about what you're saying is that, your point about like proving to a distributor that there's an audience, that there's interest, right? That there's a spark there that people can capitalize on makes so much sense. And I think there has been a lot of talk. I think maybe even we brought it up on this podcast. There was a handful of people who were talking about, like Rebecca Green's dear producer was like, "Oh, is Sundance, is it dead?" I think is maybe what the what the title of the article was. But her point being that like, oh, it's an insular community that doesn't represent whether or not a film is going to hit with an audience the way perhaps it did in the 90s or early aughts or something like that. That it wasn't the bellwether for like not just making someone's career, but also like indicating taste, quote unquote. And what you're advocating for is like, oh, there are other ways to signal taste, that people are responding, right? And so I think that's really fascinating. I think there's also something to be said about the strategy of how you present those accolades, right? We've all seen films that like will do the thing where their Vimeo, thumbnail will be like just like 45 little laurels, and you have to squint to read them, and you're like, well,
yeah,
I don't know, like
Grandma's Backyard
Film Festival. Listen, I saw some great stuff there last year, but but you know what I mean? Like it kind of inadvertently waters down the value of any one of those festivals, or the other way around, where people are like, oh, we won, the such and such award at Grandma's Backyard Festival. Do you have any thoughts on how people present their wins at a regional festival or at a festival that we happen to know is meaningful but maybe doesn't have the brand recognition of a Sundance?
Like, I guess ultimately it only matters to either draw people to see the movie, right? Oh, this movie had great reviews and everyone was raving about it at Newport Beach. Like, you got to go see it, right? But probably the bigger fish we're trying to catch is the distributor that's like, ooh, this film won this award, this audience award, or this thing, or it's got this press or this buzz. Like, I can turn that into an audience somehow, right?
I guess I think one of the things we're trying to do is also just shift the conversation. Are people watching your film? Do you know what I mean? Like, who's watching it? Not only who's watching it, for many filmmakers, this just isn't sustainable. For many filmmakers, it's like you spend all this money you spend time, you spend resources or what have you, making a thing, making a film, and, you just can't support yourself or survive, And so I think we're trying to think about, even in that case of, the multiple laurels that you talk about. Like, even that is the question. Like, how many people were in that screening? You know what I mean? Like,
that shorts block at 10 a.m. in, You know
what I mean? And even that, as filmmakers, even that is taking a lot of time. Is that the most beneficial thing? Is Grandma's Backyard Film Festival, is that the most strategic thing you can do for your film? And I think, for us, like that's the bigger question that we're asking. Like, do you really need to play 100 film festivals to say you have 100 laurels and you won? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what is the value, and where is your audience? Where are they? What are they doing? What are they watching? What are they watching it on? What platform are they watching it on? And figuring that out, and then making decisions accordingly, and making decisions about what film festivals you play. That's why I say I'm not here to say like down with Sundance. Like I'm not, you know what I mean? Sure. If that's your film, go for it. And also, if you have a lifelong dream about, apply. It doesn't hurt anybody to just apply. You never know what could happen. But again, in terms of strategy and like what you're trying to accomplish and what you're expecting, I think that's what we're trying to just get people to think about.
And with all that being said, like when you, Avril, make a movie, like you are calling like your person at Sundance, right? And your person at Tribeca and your person at TIFF and your person at Pan-African Film Festival and all these places and being like, hey, I got this movie. Can I show it to you? Like, what do you think? Right? Like that is still kind of like an experienced producer that's played in a lot of festivals. That is still a big part of the strategy, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, with the survey that we did in 2022, we found that a good number of the films that were accepted into the festival are people who have played there already, who were alumni of the festival. So, and it's with a lot of the film festivals. It's not just Sundance. It's a lot of film festivals that, bring in alumni. So yeah, that is a part of it, but it's also not, a guarantee.
Yeah, your point is kind of who cares or why should we care?
Exactly.
Well, I guess I just, because I think, we've covered this in the past, but I do think there are filmmakers out there that don't realize that there is like this whole behind the scenes of who gets into the festivals, especially those top tier festivals, which are the ones that distributors pay the most attention to, and sales agents.
And that's a great point. And I think we talk about that on the podcast as well. Like, yes, there's a lot of, alumni that, have higher percentages of getting into the festival. And also, we talked about agents. I mean, many of those films have agents that are calling on their behalf and saying, hey, I have this film, you know what I mean? Like, can we get this on your slate? And so that's something to take into consideration too, just in terms of the likelihood and the percentage of getting into a lot of these festivals. The odds start to, the possibility is always still there. But again, just thinking about like, what's the likelihood of that? And again, it's not even about the likelihood. It's really about who is your audience and who are you trying to serve? What are you trying to say? And who is it for?
Yeah. Yeah. I think of like horror film festivals, like as a weird fluke. My wife, I'd produced a short film that was like a World War II melodrama short, period piece, really like about feelings and PTSD and, like a pretty artsy, like Todd Haynes style melodrama. And we got programmed at the Chattanooga Film Festival, which is a really wonderful festival. And I remember showing up and like kind of looking around, and there were a lot of like dudes in black t-shirts and like a lot of like there was pinball machines in the filmmaker tent, like the lounge, and they were giving away tattoos that said films, y'all. And I was like, this is great. What's the deal with this film festival? And we realized that the programmer's dad loved our movie. And he was like, you got to program this movie. But otherwise, it was all genre movies. It was all like action and slashers and horror movies. Oren's wife had a movie there that was great, but it opened my eyes to like, oh, right, there's this community of avid film fans who are down to get a tattoo in a tent in the parking lot of a movie theater. But like, so playing, if you had a genre movie that was playing the Chattanooga Film Festival and building an audience there, and like you're out getting email addresses and doing the indie filmmaker hustle, that could certainly be very valuable. Maybe not necessarily quote unquote as valuable as some of the like a South by Midnight premiere, but who knows, right? There's lots of instances where you go to fancy festivals and then no one's in the seats because of a competing film or whatever. And so it really left a mark on me of like understanding film culture is not a monoculture, right? And that there are niches within all of cinema in general. And that sounds like maybe that's part of what you're getting at, right? Is like the Chattanooga Film Festival might be the right festival for you.
Exactly. I mean, it's like you said, you know, there's some films at South by, or, you know, name film festival here, like name any film festival that, you know, the theater might be half full. You know, just getting into that festival doesn't necessarily guarantee. There are no guarantee. And I think this is the other thing too, is that even if you get into a top tier festival, there's no guarantee, even with that your film will sell, that your film will be successful, that your film will be seen by an audience. There's no guarantees on any of it. And so all we're trying to do is just push people to think beyond that strategy of let me get into this top tier festival or let me get this award and that'll mean I've made it.
Yeah.
Because what we're seeing, the data is showing us that that's not proving to be the case. Like it's not, you know, it doesn't necessarily produce sales. It doesn't necessarily produce an audience. And yes, of course, there are those instances where it does. But what about those 80% that it does not?
Yeah.
And so what do we do about that?
Yeah.
So, so what's the silver lining? Like the data's not looking good. We shouldn't rely on these festivals. Tell us like a little bit about like exhibition and distribution and like, you know, we had this distributor on the podcast, I don't know, like 5 years ago, forever ago. And he said that the biggest problem he saw with like first time filmmakers and newer filmmakers is that they were not thinking of who the audience is like in the beginning when they were writing the script, you know, when they were making the movie, when they were editing the movie. They don't think about who this movie is for until the movie's done. And he's like, imagine if you just had that in mind this whole time, maybe your answer of what to do with the movie when it's done would already be had. So can you tell us like maybe some success stories or some things that don't rely on like ideas that don't rely on Sundance, that don't rely on, you know, getting like some amazing award that might be successful for distribution, for exhibition? I think like what you said about picking one of like eyeballs, impact, or money is like a really, really smart thing. But let's say I want eyeballs. Like what's the move if I didn't get into Sundance? Or even if I did get into Sundance, but I didn't sell.
Well, the thing about eyeballs, though, is that, you know, people always ask me like, well, what do you mean by eyeballs? It's like, you can get eyeballs. You can put a film on YouTube and get eyeballs. You know what I mean? Like, you can get eyeballs, you know, eyeballs are eyeballs. You know what I mean? Like, that's just, you want people to see your film. You can get eyeballs at YouTube. You can get eyeballs at a Chattanooga, what was it? Chattanooga Film Festival.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, so in terms of this is where I will say you should listen to the podcast because I know that listen to the podcast, and also we just published a companion article about Luminal. I believe it's called Luminal Theater. You know, there's all of these alternative spaces like Luminal Theater. Vidiots is, you know, here in LA is another space. But you know, Amy Hobby who is one of the co-founders of Distribution Advocates. She does share a story about a film that she produced where They did regional festivals and just kind of the level of support that they were able to get that way. She's kind of still in the middle of it. So it's still, in terms of like the bottom line end result of, money wise, like what that yields, there's kind of still in the process of it. But, she had a very successful run with doing it that way. They didn't play at a major festival for that particular film. So yeah, I think, I just shared the
Your movie.
Right, exactly. That's doing a lot of screenings for audiences that want to see that content.
So you said you premiered at the Pan-African Film Festival in LA, right? And you got good reviews and a good response. How do you take that and turn that into screening, like packed screenings and people and awareness?
Well, see, here's the thing. Every film is different. With that particular film, we only played at Pan-African Film Festival. We happened to get we used our money and got a publicist that got us, some of those write-ups. And then we put that in a package and we went to a sales agent.
Did you feel like that was money well spent, the publicist money?
I do. Because, we only had, like one festival that was not, what people call a top tier festival. It wasn't, in that vein. But like I said, we put together like a package and kind of like an EPK kind of thing to say like, this is what people are saying. And like, these are some clips from the interviews that we did, and sent that to a sales agent. And that's how we were able to get that sale. So, that was one instance. Every film is different. And again, it's assessing, not just audience, but also like it goes back to that money, eyeballs, and, and impact. I had another film that, when we set out to make it, we were kind of like, this is a film we're going to take straight to a distributor. Like we're not, we didn't have any plans on taking it to a festival at all. We were like, this is a feel good film. That's,
I produced a Christmas movie with my wife, and we ended up taking it to a few festivals just out of connections or whatever. But like, it wasn't a festival movie.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever hire a publicist, Matt?
We did.
And was that fruitful, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I think, kind of a different use case than like, Avril, you're talking about like, okay, you put that into an EPK and then use that as sales opportunities. For us, it was more of ultimately a marketing strategy because it was a Christmas movie. Like getting like a few write-ups was really helpful in so much as like every year now we're on lists of like, hey, free movies that, free Christmas movies you can stream right now on Peacock or whatever. Because we know that like the people who write those blogs, how are they figuring out what movies they can stream for free right now? They're Googling and stealing from other lists. So like we needed to be on a few of those lists just to surface the film in a meaningful way. And I think it has actually.
I just sit there with ChatGPT and I'm like, this movie is the Christmas movie to watch. Put that in your training data. Let everyone know.
Exactly. But I think, Oren, just to kind of circle back, I think your point about filmmakers knowing who the audience for their film is really kind of the root of this whole conversation, right? And that not knowing and saying, oh, my plan is to get into a big tier festival, it's the same problem, right? Like, if you sell at Sundance or if you don't sell at Sundance, it kind of doesn't matter if there's not a clear audience and a clear way to sell your film and therefore build a strategy around it in the first place, And I think that independent film sometimes attracts a sort of filmmaker who has the ability to get something made, but doesn't actually think through the marketplace in a meaningful way. my wife was at the PGA event this last weekend, and Christine Vachon was there talking about past lives, and made the point that she's the sort of producer that, like, indie filmmakers like looked at. She's like a name brand. So she's like, she's one of the anointed ones, right? And she made the point after a long career, it's still always about the marketplace for them, right? Like that, even though they're making art films, right? They're doing it with an audience and a marketplace in mind. So it's not just like, you think like, she just has incredible taste and incredible connections and like is just going to make Todd Haynes movies forever or something like that. It's still very calculated. And I think that sometimes, you can be starry-eyed and not have that sort of discipline. And then when you end up making what's probably still a really great movie, if there's not a place in the marketplace for it, that's kind of it, That's like the cynic in me, I guess, a little bit.
Well, I had one final question for Avril that's kind of related to all of this. Like, so take off your distribution sales agent, hat for a second, or I know you're not a sales agent, but kind of that, like your podcast hat, and put on your producer director hat. Like, just to take it back to the beginning, what kind of project would get you excited, would get you to think like, ooh, this can be really good. It can have impact. It can get eyeballs, and it can make money. Like nowadays in today's marketplace, when you're looking at potential movies to produce or potential projects to direct or showrun, what's what gets you going?
Well, those are kind of two different things. What gets me going?
Sure.
What gets me going?
Well, what gets you excited?
Yeah,
that where that the audience,
the artiste
is built in, and the creativity,
person.
meets, or do they never? Well, the two never meet.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I'm struggling with getting those two to meet right now, because so much of the industry right now is, about, people want what's fun, and, people want things that are light and fun. And that's just, they want things that are celebrity driven.
Mm-hmm.
And, what gets me excited is like, I want to discover new talent, but, it's like the industry wants celebrities, and they want,
like known quantity, known.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm trying to find that, that sweet spot. But, I do think that, one of the things that is, piquing my interest right now in that regard, because I tend to gravitate toward dramas. I love dramatic films, and like they're so hard to sell in the marketplace. And so I'm looking at a film right now that's like a crime drama, and that's intriguing to me because it feels like, and it has got a little bit of romance to it, but it's like in that vein where I think it can fit into what the industry is looking for, but then have a little bit of like, based on the location and like the environment, it can have a little bit of the drama and the depth that I like. Yeah, that I like from the artistic side. But then, give the industry and mainstream audiences what they want to see.
Before we hop into endorsements, where can people learn more about distribution advocates and more about you?
You can learn more about distribution advocates on our Substack, distributionadvocates.substack.com. So my handle for everything is As You Speak. That's AZUSPEAK. That's my website, asyouSpeak.com. That's me on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. So anyone can reach out to me on those platforms.
Do you have a few more minutes to hang out and endorse with
Sure.
us?
Mm-hmm.
Unpaid endorsements.
So my unpaid endorsement is for a website that I'm realizing in this moment I'm not sure I know how to pronounce. It's spelled KEH.com. Would that be KED.com?
KEH.com.
KED.com.
Is it an acronym?
either way, it's a great resource for used camera gear. So if you're like looking to buy or sell camera gear and you want just to like know that it's in decent shape, this website seems to be pretty darn awesome. They have like a great rating system. They like are pretty meticulous on like, diagnosing like how nice a lens is or isn't. They've got categories like bargain or like ugly versus like pristine shape. So if you're looking for like, in my case, I'm kind of like digging through and like looking at some old vintage lenses to play around with. And like, I don't need them to be pretty. I need them to work. So I'm willing to, save a little bit of money and mess around. So if you're sitting on camera gear or if you're looking to buy some more or both, KehOren.com has been pretty fun. So that is my endorsement. Avril, what you got?
So something that I have been spending a lot of time on. Let me just give a caveat that like I'm a huge, I'm kind of dating myself a little bit here. I'm a huge 80s fanatic. Like I love the 80s. And so I've been spending a lot of time on Tubi lately. So this is my plug for Tubi because I just discovered how many old TV shows are on Tubi. Like all of them are there. And so I've been like binging Silver Spoons, The Odd Couple. Well, I guess Odd Couple isn't really 80s, but I've just been binging a lot of old, really old TV shows, and it's free. It's just really interesting to go back and see, what these shows were about. Family Ties is on there. I've had several nights lately where I've stayed up till like 2 a.m. like, oh, and now there's this. And, as like literally one night, I think I watched so many episodes of The Odd Couple that I was just like, my God, like Tony Randall, Jack Klugman are just like,
sure. Yeah.
And then I went on a deep dive one day of like, what happened to Corky? What's the kid's name on Silver Spoons? Like Corky, I can't remember his last name. The guy who played Freddie. I was like,
Ricky Schroeder, right?
Not Ricky Schroeder, the other
no,
one.
not Ricky Schroeder. The kid
Ricky
with
Schroeder
the
was
glasses.
like, yeah, that other one.
His name was like Corky something.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, where's Corky today?
Yeah.
But yes, I've done like a deep dive on Tubi, old shows on Tubi.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah. It is funny how like all of the media companies have their own, ad supported streaming.
Huh?
Yeah.
Tubi, Pluto, and like there's one other one. Freevee. Freevee is Amazon.
Freevee is Amazon.
Pluto is Viacom. Tubi is
Fox, I believe.
Fox. There you go. Yeah. I mean, they all have them because they're also profitable, right? They're sitting on library content. But you just watched how many ads on like inventory that wasn't making them any money before.
Right.
Now it's so easy. Like all of that library content is making them big money. Yeah.
I'm also just like, I keep talking about The Odd Couple because I was like, this was such a great show. Like it's just so well written. And I'm just, rediscovering some of those things.
Sure. Yeah.
And by the way, there is an ALF channel.
Oh, good to know. Good to know.
Through this deep dive, I discovered an ALF channel.
I love it.
You can watch Columbo. I've heard a few people binge that whole show.
Yeah, I'd watch Columbo. That sounds good.
That's on Tubi.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well,
I was on the last couple episodes talking about how I bought an antenna, like an HD antenna to connect to my TV so I could watch like the Super Bowl and the Oscars and stuff for free.
Yeah.
But last night I was like saying to my wife, we watched that show Shogun, the first episode, and then I was like, babe, check this out. And I just like turned on like channel 5 KTLA news, and it's just like it's just like 10 o'clock news, 11 o'clock news, 12 o'clock news. All it is news. And the news is just like this motorcyclist crashed into this car.
Yeah.
And he made it. And it's like, I guess I didn't miss anything. Like, I guess I don't need this antenna. aside from like those two interesting events that go
You're
on every
the
year.
Super Bowl and the Oscars and the Grammys, basically.
Yeah. Then other than that, it's just like
industry alive.
it's literally like the panda almost had a baby at the zoo.
Sure.
Thing.
Yeah.
Weather's pretty rough this weekend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kaplan, what you got?
So I'm sure I've talked about him before. There's this director, Pons, Jewell. He is, according to all the data, according to the distribution advocates data, the most sought after, most famous commercial director working right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've just always been a huge fan of his work and didn't really know anything about him. And somehow on YouTube recently, I just like the algorithm figured out I like him or something. That's just been showing me interviews with him. And I just watched two really good ones. They're like an hour and a half each. They're one. It's like a 3-hour interview, but split into 2 episodes. And it's this DP is interviewing him. His name is Ian Murray DOP. That's his channel, and the episodes are called basically Ian Pons Jewell, episode 1 and 2. Ian Pons Pons Jewell Jewell interview. And he just takes every commercial he's made and just asks him, like, how'd you come up with this? What camera did you use? What probe lens did you use? How did you like do this? What part is VFX? What part is drone? How did you marry these shots together? And you just like get into this guy's brain about like how he comes up with the shots and how he chooses his crew and how he shoots in Ukraine one day and then in LA the next day remotely and ties those shots together. But he did this whole amazing Xbox campaign with Daniel Kaluuya that he redirected him remotely, the entire thing. He was like in Ukraine and Daniel Kaluuya was in LA. And I mean, these are like mind blowing commercials and stuff that he makes. And he said the most interesting thing he said is that he doesn't believe in director's cuts. He believes in client cuts. He's like, I'm the filmmaker, right? I'm making this commercial or whatever it is, music video, short film. He's like, and the film that I'm making is the film. He's like, and then the client, they have a client cut, you know? It's like, that's their cut. But like my cut is like the cut.
Is the cut.
But he not in like a Tarantino, like I get final cut. No one like messes with me way. Just like like the client has their needs and they will make this thing more product, make it shorter. But like my cut is the cut. Like I don't think of it as like the wicked stepchild of the edit. I think of it as the main cut, and it's kind of interesting. And he even, his commercials that don't ever get released, he talked about how he finishes all of them because he looks at them as films. And he also just looks at the commercial industry as something that if he just worked hard enough at it, he could get to a level where he could just sustainably get work and make a living and not have to worry about the next job and slowly only take good jobs. And I don't know, it's really,
That's cool.
I'm a huge fan and it's really fun. So Ian Pons Jewell on YouTube, and the account is Ian Murray DOP is who's interviewing him. And the interview is shot well too, obviously, because the DP's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Do they show you? Do they show you like clips from the commercials when you're watching YouTube? Cool.
They do show you the clips, and he does he did like that Apple Watch commercial that was like, does it tell time? I don't know if you guys remember that. I think it's narrated by Phil Dunphy from Modern Family,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, well, it does this and it does this and does this, but does it tell time? And it's like just the most incredible camera work you've ever seen, and funny and dynamic and poignant. Anyhow,
what's the name again?
His name is Ian Pons Pons Jewell Jewell. And he's like a British filmmaker, but mainly known for commercials, and kind of skyrocketed over the last 4 years. If you have any comments, if you want us to forward any of your questions about distribution or anything else, producing, if you want to send us some scripts for us to forward to Avril, you can email us at justshootitpod@gmail.com. You can find us across all social media at justshootitpod. I'm on Instagram at okaplan.
And I'm at Mr. Matt Edlow. This episode was edited by Noah Bayshore, thanks Noah, and produced by Noah and Tyler Small. And you're listening to music provided by the Free Music Archive and the artist Jahzzar. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.